And hello, everyone. I want to welcome you back once again to the 2020 Small Farms Winter Webinar Series. This is hosted by University of Illinois Extension's Local Food Systems and Small Farms team. This is Bronwyn Ailey. I'm a local food small farms educator in far southern Illinois, and I will be your moderator and coordinator for our final weekly dive into all things small farms. We appreciate you joining us for these webinars. And we will do our best to begin and end within the space of your lunch hour. This is a tight time frame for our educators to deliver in-depth, actionable information. So please understand why we are limiting your questions to the text box at the left during the presentation. We will do our best to make sure our presenters answer them as time allows. Just to let you know, this presentation is being recorded, and Zach Grant, our fellow Extension educator, will email a link to the archived presentation as soon as possible after this webinar concludes. There will be a link for a very short online evaluation of this presentation included in that email, and we would very much appreciate your feedback. We will also try to start sharing a screenshot of the QR code that links to the survey at the end of each webinar, so you can use a smartphone camera or scan the QR code and take you directly to that evaluation. We are using Zoom's webinar platform this year, so there are a few additional features that we want to point out for those that may be unfamiliar with this platform. There is a poll that you should be able to click on in your webinar toolbar. It's should be at the bottom of your screen. There you will find a voluntary and anonymous demographic form that would be very helpful for us in Extension. Also, there is both a Q&A section and a chat box. The Q&A section is for questions that you have for the presenter. I can ask the presenter at the end, or maybe a moderator will be able to answer if possible. The chat box can be used for all other technical questions related to the webinar, for example, sound issues or other technical problems that you might be having during this webinar. We can help you with. And for today, instead of having one presenter, you are going to have two different speakers today. We have local foods and small farms educators James Theory and Doug Gooker. We'll be co-presenting today's webinar, The Basics of Goat and Sheep. And Doug serves DeWitt, Macon, and Piatt counties, and James serves Grundy, Kankakee, and Will counties. And then in their roles as extension educators, they improve producer profitability and sustainability through demonstration and programming focused on using appropriate management strategies in all aspects of production. Their work demonstrates practices in the areas of farm management, soil health, nutrient management, integrated pest management, ruminants, and grazing. And with that, I believe you guys are ready to go. So take it away, James and Doug.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Bronwyn. I'll get going here because of shortage of time. And the first, the first topic will be housing and fencing by myself, and later on the health. And the thing about housing and fencing is that you gotta have those two before you acquire your animals. Because you want to know where these animals will be sleeping when they come, and then where do you want to confine them when it comes to the farm setting. So housing. Shelters for sheep and goats can be as basic or as elaborate as the grazer intends. Totally unventilated structures are bad for sheep and goats, and as we shall mention later, when you have them totally unventilated, they start holding pollutant gases that are capable of causing respiratory diseases. And so you have some pictures here of some simple structures. The bottom right-hand one is a little more elaborate. If you have 300, 400 sheep here, by all means, invest in something like that. If you're in the 20, 30, 40 kind of hard, then simple structures will do. And what I'm showing there is structures that are out in the field. We'll talk about the ones indoors as well. There's also the possibility that a farmer is able to convert a former poultry house or hog parlor into facilities that can hold sheep and goats. That's been done quite a few times. Or an old barn, for that matter. Okay, housing types, we keep them simple. I reiterate that again. Sheep will handle cold climates well, but not goats. And I'm referring to our area here in Northern Illinois. The top left-hand corner picture there is showing a structure that is permanent, and it is open in the front, maybe for nighttime holding of the herd. If you know that you don't have predators and you don't have that cold temperature, then it can be left like that. For our area, we need a little bit more enclosure and leaving some ventilation, as I formally said there. So both animals, and talking about sheep and goats here, will need shelter from extremities of weather. And although sheep will handle extreme cold, goats will not. And both will also need some shelter from extreme heat. And so the simple structures that you see there are three-sided with the front open. Keep the front end away from prevailing wind, and it should be okay. But in our area here, again, you need to have these structures kind of tethered down because the strength of the wind can turn them over. What's the best housing for field shelters? Now, best is kind of subjective, and this person suggested the dimensions that you see on that slide there. Obviously, they can be modified to suit whatever operation you are doing and what material you have for building. And you know, it will be going by how you wanna do your structure. I've indicated there that you allow about 10 to 12 square feet per animal. This is more serious indoors than, you know, where they spend the nighttime or indoors than outside. Outside, they are there sharing the space to prevent themselves from the rain or the inclement weather, and they don't mind too much. But indoors, especially the pregnant animals, they need more space for themselves. And then also if there's fighting, there's not so much room to escape. So indoors is where spacing is more important. The southwest side, if you face the open end, also serves to give the animals some warmth. Still on the housing types, again, I have pictures of various housing types just to illustrate that you can, you know, there's no one formula for making these outdoor structures. Make them using whatever material you find that is cheap and available. But at this point also, if I go to the next slide, I also want to say these housings may be great for better conditions for management. They could be used for lambing, they could be used for sharing. You could bring the animals in, even to these small structures, to check on the disease aspect or treat them. Could be for feeding purposes or watering purposes. And you also tend to reduce pasture damage as well as soil damage, because then they congregate over here as opposed to being all over the place and messing the pasture. Still on housing, read for yourself what is on the slide there, reiterating quite a few of the things I have said. But at this point, I want to come up and talk about bedding in the housing. First of all, the bedding provides warmth, insulation, and comfort for the animals. And the materials that one could use for the bedding include straw, hay, dried corn stalks, peanut hulls, sawdust, wood shavings, sand, leaves, and more. Each one of these has advantages and disadvantages. Straw is great unless you can get cheaper, low quality hay. Sawdust is okay, but it gets in the wool of the sheep. So again, if you have alternatives, use those. Whatever you use, keep it clean and dry. Within the confines of indoor housing, it's also recommended that you have a side space there where you can isolate animals. That can also be done in the pasture, as you see in the picture there. And you build a small pen with using various materials for all the purposes that are listed on the slide. A particularly important one is for quarantining the new goats and sheep, because you don't know if they brought in anything from wherever they came from. And then within that confine, the others can start getting used to the new animals. But if you have a sick animal, it's a good place to isolate it in as well. Or if an animal is about to lamb and you want to isolate it again, that can be a great structure. And that's it about housing because of time that is allowed. Let's talk about fencing. Fences are barriers, and good fences control animals. And the goal of fences anyway is to keep animals in that you want in and to keep animals out that you don't want to come in. And you can tell I'm talking about livestock as well as wild animals, which include predators, which can of course prey on the animals that you keep. Or you don't want any deer to come in because they may be carrying ticks that have Lyme disease, which can then be transmitted to your livestock. So build it well and be focused to the purpose for which you're building it for. If you do it right first time, it will save you tons of time and money later on in repairs and trying to make it right. So it's probably the biggest expense you'll have to go through if you're a new person trying to raise sheep and goats. And good fences will enhance or reduce predation. That's one. We already said that. And it will also manage the grazing. Now, managed grazing, which is also mentioned here, is a great topic. It can take a long time to talk about. But when you have managed grazing, and you're using fencing for managed grazing, it will allow you to have smaller paddock subdivisions for short grazing intervals. Now, this helps with resting of the forage so that it can regrow. It also improves the harvest efficiency of these animals. So overall, you have improved grass utilization and reduced forage wastage. And I think you're going to be told later that the biggest expense in raising these small ruminants, and any animal for that matter, is the feed. So if you can save yourself money buying hay and other types of feed, then it will be more profitable. So, and as we have seen, fences are barriers, but then there are laws and regulations. If you live within areas that have the zoning laws, you need to Google state fence laws, and that should give you information about the kind of fence you're allowed to erect, or the height of the fence, those types of things. And I've given you an example of the Illinois website that gives you those laws. They say that if you throw water to a fence and it goes through, so will a goat. So in erecting fences, it's the goats you need to pay more attention to because the smallest hole and you soon find them going out. They're also capable of doing some limited amount of climbing even over the fence. So again, be careful, make it right the first time. And that's why I gave you a resource there. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is a great resource for you to go to. The personnel, the staff there will give you advice, and maybe you may even get a low interest fence loan from them under the environmental quality incentive project or something like that. And so you may end up gaining quite a bit more. Okay. When we fence, we have to consider both exterior and interior fencing. Exterior fences are permanent and usually made with high tensile wires. Now that's okay with bigger ruminants like cattle. But when it comes to sheep and goats, you want to go with woven wire, as shown in the bottom there, to keep out smaller predators and also to keep, especially the goats, in. They know how to go through other types of fences. The temporary fences or the interior fences, they can keep, first of all, they can keep the buck away, the male sheep or the male goat away from the females, because you don't want breeding throughout the year. You want that to be controlled. And various types of wires can be used. And one of the wires that we talk about in a second will be electric wires that have been found to be very efficient at keeping animals where you want them to be, either inside or out. And in this slide, I have examples of exterior fence like that one. You notice that the bottom three strands are way much closer than the strands at the top. That will keep your animals in and those that you want out. In this picture, you see woven fence again. And you also notice that that post could be a railroad post. When you start out, use the cheapest materials possible. So, and this one is another woven wire, but also look at, I don't know if you can see me pointing, there is a brace that gives strength to the post at the corner there. And we'll talk about that in a second, because the corner post is something you need to give due consideration to. It is the foundation for the entire fence construction process. It gives great stability to the fence. And to prevent fence failure, consult with an expert or NRCS for help, and you should save yourself tons of money later on. Again, this is just to show you that when you consider goats, I said they are a challenge. The animals always like grass on the other side of the fence. It's always better and tastier. But you can tell that the goat that is already at the top left-hand corner there, if it was frightened because a predator was coming, it would get hooked right there, it wouldn't move. And so, and with the other places, the goat that is on the bottom left could get its feet caught in the strands of wire there. This is an illustration of electric fencing, and the only thing I want you to notice is that the charger is getting provision of energy from somewhere, either solar panel or from the house. Then that charger is providing energy in joules, it's measured in joules, to the electric fence, which you can see in the green area there. And that the wires are grounded. So electric current is flowing through those wires to the ground, back to the charger, and like that. And the reason why we get electrocuted is when we hold those wires and we are standing on the ground, we are actually grounding the wire. So that's what happens when the animals touch that, they get zapped and they get to learn to keep away from it and stay where they wanted. Again, examples of electric wire netting, and you see the charger at the top right-hand corner, delivering 1,200 kilojoules, and stay posts that you see in between there could be wooden or could be plastic, holding the strands of wire if they're electric. So all fences require maintenance. They get old and rusty. They can break. The woods can rot and fall over, okay? Or if you don't remove the weed grasses at the bottom there, it can be shorting the wire, and then you are losing energy. And trying to move the slide. Yes, and that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, hi, my name's Doug Gooker. There's my picture, Mr. Bowtie, and I'm going to talk about pastures and forages. The first thing we need to do with a pasture, whether you have an old pasture or you're thinking about creating a new pasture from scratch, is we need to take a soil sample. We need to know the fertility of that soil so we can get that grass, our forages, off to the best start possible. And when we're going to recondition a pasture, we should do the same thing as well. Soil test is going to tell us what we need to have. It's going to tell us our pH. If we're reseeding a new pasture, we want to get that limed ahead of time for the seeding, so it has some time for it to, the lime has time to interact with the soil. We want a minimum pH of 6 for if it's a solid grass pasture, and around 6.5 for grass legume mixes, and a little higher than that for alfalfa. As you can see, there's also what we need for our phosphorus and also for our potassium. So, and these can be applied as needed, summer or fall, to keep that going. The species of pasture species are forage species. Goats, sheep and goats like diversity. They're not like a horse that can get by on a solid bluegrass pasture. Sheep and goats, they like to have grass. They like to have broadleaves, forbs as we call it. And so they like mixed pastures. And goats like browse as well, something that's a little woodier. So goats are known for eating from the top down and sheep from the bottom up. And so you'll notice that the tallest weeds or tallest plants in a pasture is what the goats will eat first. That's the way they go. As far as grasses, here in Illinois, orchard or brome grass do very well. Southern Illinois, we're in the tall fescue belt, and both these species tolerate fescue better than cattle do. So that's the good news. That's the good news. And then a legume to put in there would be either an alfalfa or one of the clovers. And we have lots of good grazing alfalfas as well. The other thing to think about is warm season forages, supplemental forages that we can use to fill in some of the gaps in the grazing season, our warm seasons, like our millets or brassicas, or even sorghum Sudan, can do a great job filling in a summer gap, that July heat, when our cool season species tend to go into a slump. And then I have small grains down there, and they can be especially important if we're trying to extend the grazing season later into the fall, into November and December, or if we're wanting to get started earlier in the spring, say February or March, because our grains some of our small grains tend to start growing as soon as the temperature reaches 40 degrees. So nutrient requirements, of course, we need energy, protein, minerals, vitamins, and water. And as James already mentioned, feed, other than our initial cost for our fencing, is the biggest cost we have when we raise animals. And that's the beauty of having small ruminants, sheep and goats, because they're very efficient users of forage, and we can feed them if we do it right. James mentioned the practice of using managed grazing. We can, here in Illinois, graze for 9 months out of the year and longer. Southern Illinois, they can go longer because Kentucky's talking about grazing 12 months out of the year. And so we do have that ability. And once again, these animals were built to eat green forage. So our grazing styles, and this comes back to this controlled grazing, that's rotational, versus continuous. That's where we just throw them out in the pasture and we leave them out there and they'll graze down part of it to the ground, and some of it will grow up into tall, woody, fibrous material that they'll never touch. And so that's the reason why we like to break it into these smaller paddocks like James talked about, and do the rotational grazing. And as you can see here on this old slide from the University of Minnesota, if we rotate twice a week, we can have an efficiency of 60%. There are people now that are real managed grazers that are rotating every 24 hours, and they're approaching 70% efficiency, which is about as good as you can get. But if you notice, if you just leave them out there all year, we get down to where we only have about 1/3 efficiency as far as our grazing. So we're wasting almost half of the material out there. As far as making our grazing season longer, this is where we can add to it in the spring, and we can put in our warm seasons to fill that slump that we have in July and August with our cool season grasses and our legumes, our clovers and alfalfas. So once again, just something that kind of keep in mind that grazing is a little more than just turning animals out into a fenced-in area. It's a real management process. Goats, here, University of Kentucky, in cooperation with Kentucky State, they did a goat preference trial where they seeded 17 different plots, and they took a look to see what they preferred. And they found that sorghum Sudan was the most preferred by the goats, at least the goats in their trial. I have a little red asterisk down here by Cerisa lesbidiza, and the reason for that is that particular legume is extremely high in tannins, and it has been research has shown that the high level of tannins are effective in reducing the internal parasite load in goats and sheep. And so that's the only reason why I throw that in there, because typically we don't recommend Cerisa lesbidiza in a pasture, but for our small ruminants, we are beginning to look at that quite a bit. The effect of growth and maturity. Now we'll get our maximum yield on a forage if we let it go all the way till it seeds out. But as you can see, the cellulose, it goes to its maximum, and the feed efficiency drops off incredibly because our protein levels drop to nothing. So over here on the right slide, our key spot is that we want to be harvesting, if possible, whether for hay or for grazing, when that particular plant is in the pre-bloom stage or in the boot, but before it shoots the head, if it's a grass. And so we're kind of looking at this sweet spot because it gives us our best nutritional value and the best yield. And so that is what sounds good. Did I lose?
Hey, Doug, hold on one second. We've got a comment in the chat box that they had lost your sound. It says sound skipping like crazy.
Oh.
So let's do a couple tests. Everybody in the chat box, if you can hear, give us a
Yes.
thumbs up. Let's see how many are
Yes.
having sound issues and not.
Yes. Okay, Zach can hear. Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay. All right. I'll move on then. Okay.
Okay, looks like
the person who can't hear us, they can maybe get out and get in again.
Yes. Okay, I'll continue on. So the other thing we need to do every year, and before we turn animals into any pasture, particularly if it's a new pasture, we need to check for any poisonous plants. Our small ruminants, it doesn't take very much of a poisonous plant to kill one of these animals. And that is the one thing we don't want to do. We don't want to lose an animal because, first of all, uh, that's a loss of productivity. It's also going to be something that that poor animal is now not going to be able to live its life and provide us with young. So we need to go out, we need to do an inspection of our paddocks and pastures and make sure. And if you're not sure, get help. Some of us in extension, we can go out and do that for you, but there's also people like NRCS and some of our other local agencies that can do that as well. Yes, I told you about how great we can do with just keeping our small ruminants out on pasture if we're doing a good job managing the pasture. But there's going to be times of the year where we're going to probably have to do some supplemental feeding. And this is going to be with our ewes and does, if we're wanting to get them ready for breeding, and particularly when we're getting towards late gestation and when they're lactating. It's tremendously important that those females have the energy they need so that they can provide the milk to their young. Another problem is if we get into drought situations, we may have to feed other forages, other types of feed just because our animals are running out of food. Now, on the other hand, for lambs and kids, we can do that, first of all, to help them grow faster, finish faster for market. Sometimes it can help with parasite tolerance. And then once again, this idea, if we're running out of forage, we can just stretch those forage supplies. Types of our supplements, typically salt, mineral mixes. Here, at least in the central part of the state where I am, when raising sheep, selenium. We're selenium deficient, and sheep need selenium. It's not that kind of an issue with goats, but sheep need selenium. And so lots of times our sheep mineral mixes made for sheep, don't use a cattle mineral mix because it's too high in copper, will give us the selenium that particularly our breeding animals and young growing animals need. And then other types of supplemental feeds, of course, are hay, grain, and then other types of roughages, which could even be corn stalks if we're just trying to get ewes who aren't carrying young or they're at the very beginning of their gestation period, get them through the winter. So with that, I'll turn it back over to James.
Thank you, Doug. Let's talk about animal health and a preamble here. If you are new to and you're thinking of keeping sheep and goats, yes, they're affected by diseases and other parasites. Don't be discouraged, because if you have sound management, these diseases and parasites will not be as challenging as they appear to be. But that said, good feeding and breeding and housing will not result in maximum production if sheep and goats are not kept in good health. It's paramount to be on top of their health. And so for maximum economic returns, you want to keep disease, insects, and mite infestations to a minimum. And this slide asks you to know signs of good and bad health. Now, you don't need any animal science background to see that this sheep is less than good. I mean, yeah, all those signs, you need to know them. Most of us on the webinar have been parents, and the first thing you all do when your children wake up is to observe them, and you can always tell when they are not in a good, when they have signs of bad health. You can always tell. It's the same thing with animals, and the one thing we tell all animal raisers, it doesn't matter what animals, walk your animals every morning. See which one didn't stand up when everybody else stood up. See which one isn't lively. Those are just vital signs that you need to observe. And the best management for diseases is being proactive. There's no two ways about it. You gotta reduce the risks by being very proactive. Sanitation, which is the routine management that you see over there, or includes the routine management, requires time and money, but it is time and money well spent, since prevention is more economical than treatment. So we want to keep our housing, the feed and water, sanitary and fresh. Otherwise, you're going to get diseases and issues, as I've just shown there on the slide. You don't want an animal that's looking like that, which just appeared on the slide. You want an animal that's looking like the top right-hand corner, the one on the top right-hand corner. Straight back, nice gait and posture, head held high. I mean, an unthrifty animal is quite obvious from a well taken care of animal. Then learn some basics. And at this point in time, I want to stress that you need to make friends with a veterinarian. You want to know a veterinarian. They are expensive to bring out to your farm, but just talking to them, you know, emailing them, and I'm going to give you an email towards the end of this presentation. Just talking to them keeps you in the know about therapy of animals and even vaccinations, which you may not know how to administer, but talk to somebody else who knows how to. We had a class here and we were shown how to administer these drugs or how to take blood samples, how to take temperature. Those kinds of things come to our programs. And then, so the point I want to make then from here on is that by being proactive prevents you from being reactive. When you can see warning signs, 2 pictures over there of animals that are not looking great, and there are things to learn. The normal temperature of a goat or a sheep is 102 to 103. Body condition, that one you can be taught by somebody who is experienced in raising sheep or goats, or a veterinarian. And then Famacha is another technique whereby you learn how to correlate the worm load, the worm, the barber pole worm that is in the animal with the anemia in the animal. So low anemia means low loads, and you have high anemic animal, then you better be treating. And Famacha helps you to do the treatment, to make a decision on whether to treat or not. And other signs of discomfort or poor health is pain and grinding of teeth. And of course, if an animal is diarrheaing, it's a sign. There are very many vaccines that are available for sheep and goats. And in production situations, one of the most common problems we have is the Clostridial diseases. And Clostridial, and we'll talk about that in a second. When do we vaccinate? Again, consulting with your vet helps. Consulting with somebody who is experienced helps. You don't want to administer these vaccinations at the wrong time because they'll not be effective. Right there, you can see the does and ewes that are about to give birth need to be vaccinated 3 to 4 weeks, because you are focusing on protecting the young ones. So that needs to be administered at the right time. Now we keep dogs with our animals just for protection against predators. Should that dog turn rabid, it can potentially get the sheep and goats rabid. And there is a vaccine against rabies even in these animals. Okay, we talk about internal parasites, and there are quite a good number of these that can get into animals, both sheep and goats. And it is normal for them to have them. And we don't really need to be worried when they are in small amounts, especially the worms. But the two parasites of primary concern that I'm going to talk about in this presentation are the barber poleworm, shown there in that picture, and that condition of scouring or diarrheaing that you see in the sheep, in the lambs over there, is due to coccidia. And before I get to those two again, I want to mention that both sheep and goats can have enormous numbers of parasites, ectoparasites, that means on the outside, on the wool and the skin on the outside. And they can include all the ones that you see there. It could be insects or mites, the arachnids. And oh, yeah, before I continue, I wanted to share this picture of the coccidia, now that it is available here, as well as the barber poleworm, the two bottom pictures there. So coccidia, that causes a disease called coccidiosis, and maybe you're familiar with coccidiosis in chickens, is a potentially lethal disease that can cause death in these animals. It's caused by a protozoan parasite, and a third of the sheep in the US have this parasite. And it is encouraged by various variables that are listed here. And on the right, you can see what they do to the animal in the gastrointestinal system. Coccidia like to live in the abomasum, sucking blood, and the sheep start diarrheaing, and the diarrhea could include blood and mucus, and then they are poor performers, and you know all the conditions of poor performance. And this could very quickly lead to death. And I might as well say this disease appears very suddenly, all of a sudden. So they need to be vaccinated against it. Right, talk about the barber poleworm parasite. It's internal, and first thing you notice is a bottle jaw, is shown right there, the swelling of the jaw. And then the animal becomes unthrifty, and the condition worsens from, as the disease or as the worm load increases, because the worms are, of course, competing for food with the animal. The life cycle is very simple. The adult is in the gastrointestinal system. They lay eggs. The eggs are passed out in the feces onto the pasture, and the eggs hatch, and the larval form goes through 3 stages of their life to become the infective stage, which is picked up by the animal when it is grazing. And let me point out here that it is the worms actually travel up the blade of grass in water, in a thin film of water, waiting to, and they stay in the dew water on the leaf, waiting to be picked up by the goat. The name is Haemonchus contortus, very common, one of the most destructive pathogenic organisms in the sheep and goats. And they suck blood. And so, since we know the enemy and how it lives, if you can avoid taking your animals out until 10 a.m. in the morning when the grass has kind of dried and there's no thin film over there, you'll be doing integrated parasite management or integrated pest management. So that's one strategy right there. Then the other thing is to just wait until your animals get sick and then you start deworming them. In the past, what grazers would do would be to line up their animals and all 100 of them, they would be dewormed. And of course, you and I know when we challenge parasites or pathogens like that, they develop resistance. And yes, worms have developed various degrees of resistance to all types of deworming antihelminthics or drugs. Therefore, somebody in South Africa developed this Farmacia technique that I mentioned earlier, where you correlate the anemic condition in sheep with the worm load. And you get this card there that shows you various colors, so that if the eyelid or the eye is too white, it's anemic. If it is red, it's in good condition. So based on that, you line up your 100 sheep or your 100 goats and go through each one of them and know who should be treated and who should not be treated. That way you keep the resistance development to a minimum. That's one way. Then the other thing is, of course, to vary the antihelmintic being given, or give a mix of them, or avoid getting your animals infested in the first place. All right, another thing that grazers don't do, and I've observed this myself, is that they don't take care of the hooves of their animals. Animals in the wild take care of themselves because they are walking on rough terrain, on rocks and all that. The grinding takes place and you get hoofs that look like what you're seeing in the picture there, although there's been a bit of trimming done here. But since we've domesticated these animals and maybe they're on concrete, which is very smooth, or they're walking on pasture all the time, the hooves grow to very uncomfortable shapes. And if you let them grow more and more, you have risks of diseases, okay? And we are going to see that in the next few slides. Now, hoof trimming, get somebody who knows how to do it to show you, because if you don't do it properly, you're going to get the animals bleeding, and that's not what we want. We want you to just trim them and get them walking nicely again. How often do you do it? It depends. That's one of the best extension answers. It depends. More than once a year is preferable. Check your animals. Look at them. See how they are walking and see how they look like every morning when you walk them. Okay. I included a little bit of pictorial representation of how to trim a sheep hoof here. How you start off, remove any soil that is lodged or rocks in between the two claws of the hoof, then start cutting away and do a good job. That's shown right there. And what your aim is to move from what is shown on the right-hand side to what is being shown in the center pictures there. You know, if you don't do a good job with your trimming of the hooves, this is what might, oh, and there's a hoof trimming video there that you can look at. Just check it out if you don't find somebody to help you. If you don't trim these hooves, what is going to happen? You might get foot rot. Now that looks gross, and that is very uncomfortable for the animal when it's walking. Or you could get a foot scald, which is an infection that happens between the claws of the hooves. Now you don't want both of those two. Again, be sensible. When you feed these animals, okay, you cover the trough so it doesn't get rained on and the feed doesn't get moldy and all that good stuff. But look at where these animals are standing. Very nice situation for hoof rot to be happening, and the cover here should be a bit bigger, okay? And you want to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side for best condition. If you're going to be talking to your veterinarian, she or he would want to know what records you've been keeping about the animal that you have a question about. So keep records. Records these days are imperative in sound management. It's one of the best management practices. I've given you quite a number of references. These two books are great, especially if you are new. They're easy to read. University of Illinois has a few good references right there. University of PSU is where? Pennsylvania State University, Penn State. It's got one self-taught course that you can use. And then the veterinarian help. I have talked to Dr. Jennifer Miller in the past, and we still talk even now. If you write to her, info@Rush Creek Farms, take a picture, describe the condition of your sheep or goat, she'll get back with you. Dr. Kristen Taylor used to do that. I don't know if she's still doing that anymore. I wrote to her to ask her if she's still available. She hasn't gotten back to me. And that ends my presentation. And I want to ask any one of you who finds a sheep on top of a goat to send me that picture. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to take over the last bit about marketing, what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about marketing our small ruminants. First of all, we need to treat this like a business. If we're going to get into raising sheep or goats, so we need a business plan, some kind of a written document that outlines how you plan to run your business. And it's been evidence that shows that if you just preparing a business plan gives you a greater opportunity to be profitable over the long run. The other thing is you need a marketing plan. What are you going to sell? Are you going to sell cheese? Are you going to sell goat milk? You're going to sell fiber, fleeces, or are you selling meat? What are you going to do? And then where are you going to sell it? Who's your market? How are you going to sell it? And then finally, you have to determine, is all this going to be profitable when you figure out all the expenses you're going to have being in the sheep or goat business. So sheep and goats are multi-purpose animals. They can be meat, they can be fiber and pelts. The pelts can be quite valuable if you do a good job. Milk, as I said, or dairy. This is our milk, dairy, yogurts, ice creams. Land management, vegetation control, that's getting to be a growing thing as municipalities and public areas look for non-chemical ways of controlling vegetation, particularly on steep slopes. And then agritourism, petting zoos, all kinds of different things like that. Meat production, I want to just mention, I raised and market lambs for 18 years. And so lamb is any animal under 1 year of age. And typically in the United States, most of our lambs are marketed around 9 to 10 months. Over 1 year, that is mutton. It is not lamb. An old sheep is not a lamb, it's mutton. Primary reason that sheep and goats are raised is because all of our animals are going to be reproducing, whether we have them for fleece or dairy or whatever purpose. And our females are going to be providing us with the young. And a lot of times those males are the excess. We don't need a lot of rams or bucks running around our flocks. And so that's where this meat production comes in, or the selling of live animals. Half of lamb and almost all the goat produced in the U.S. is consumed by non-traditional markets, non-commodity markets. The other thing we have to remember when we're selling meat from these animals is that the prices tend to peak around various religious holidays. Easter, the various Easters, whether Christian or Orthodox Easter, all the various Muslim festivals, as well as some festivals that go on in the Caribbean and in Central America, Carnival and things like that. So the price can vary tremendously because of when the demand is in relation to when the supply is. And then the other thing is the infrastructure. Is there meat processing? Are there buyers? All those things. The good news is the U.S. imports nearly 60% of all the lamb and kid, a young goat, a cabrito, that is eaten in the United States. So we still have plenty of room for market expansion in the United States. And if you want to learn more about some of the good times at which some of the higher price markets for selling the meat animals into, go to sheepgoatmarketing.info. It's from Cornell, and they've got a great calendar there. The ultimate goal is for a producer is that we're producing pounds of lamb or goat that we wean. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking for early puberty, how prolific they are, their mothering ability, how well the offspring survive, milk production, not only for dairy, but also for supplying milk to those young growing animals. And then out of season breeding may become important if you're looking to sell live animals or meat animals into one of these holiday markets where there's demand. So besides marketing sheep and goats, we can do as for meat or live animals, we can take them to public auctions. There are some co-ops and pools in the state. We do have lamb and goat brokers around the state that go out and try and bring in animals, because Chicago is the largest slaughter of lamb and goat meat in the United States, as well as local meat processors. Live animals, for the ethnic market, they may want to slaughter on your farm. This is something where you need to take a look at the law. Here in Illinois, the law says that a person may slaughter an animal that they have owned for 30 days. So that gets to be kind of a sticky wicket if you're trying to get around the law. And then, of course, there's the freezer trade. We can sell breeding stock, as well as we can also we can sell live animals, and then we facilitate the slaughter with a meat processor. If we're going to be selling cuts of meat, it's going to require certified inspection and labeling, and that can be state or USDA. State inspected meat can be sold anywhere within the state of Illinois. If you're going to be wanting to sell outside the state of Illinois, it must be USDA inspected. And you'll need that for retail stores, restaurants, farm store, internet, farmers market, all those types of things. We need a broker's license. Well, in Illinois, we need a meat broker's license if we sell wholesale. So in other words, if we sell to anyone besides an individual or a single household. So here's our slaughter regulations with Illinois. Here's our two different seals that we have, our state seal and our USDA inspected seal, depending upon what you need. An example of how that might look if you're going to get this custom processed and sell it under your own label. You can do that. Just remember that if you're going to be selling cuts of meat, you're going to want to go to a type 1 type of meat processor. In other words, the slaughter and processing is under some type of inspection. Type 2 inspection, that would be where you would deliver the animal that someone has bought from you to a meat processor, and then that person then pays for the processing and picks the meat up there at the processor. And that will be the infamous white paper wrapped meat that says cannot be sold for resale. So for those, do you need a meat broker's license? If you sell to individual households, it's not needed. Only for when we're selling wholesale. Then the meat broker's license is needed. Fiber production right here in Illinois. If you're going to do fiber production, we're looking at going for a special market. And so that's either going to be fine wool or some of our long coarse wools. We're looking for the weavers and spinners, or we're going to go for some type of specialty. And then for goats, don't forget goats, we've got Angora and Cashmere. And so once again, they can be quite valuable as well. Another thing when you're thinking about selling fiber, the commodity market, in other words, just selling it into the open market, that's going to be the lowest price you're going to get. Direct marketing is where we can get our premium prices. And then there's also the idea of even adding more value to that fleece by either doing on-farm or having it custom processed. Dairy production, the key thing we need to remember here is that both sheep and goats were milked before the cow was. Goats produce more milk, but sheep produce a higher protein, a higher fat content milk, which makes makes a more desirable cheese. Although we make great cheese out of goat milk. Key thing is a grade A dairy is what you need for fluid milk. A grade B dairy is what you need if you're going to do cheese or other manufactured dairy products. You can have an ungraded dairy, which is just fine for soap or lotions or for your personal use. And then raw milk can be sold, but only in Illinois, only on the premises of the dairy. People have to come on to the premises of the dairy. Other sources of revenue. Vegetation control, as I talked about. Goats, natural browsers. They prefer to eat brush, briars, tree saplings, twigs. So they're being used quite a bit for grazing, particularly in areas where herbicides are not wanting to be used, but yet they're wanting to bring the brush under control. Sheep, on the other hand, are being found to work quite well in solar farms, grazing the grass around the solar panels. And this can be done, it's a fee-based service, and it is catching on in a number of states and municipalities. And then finally, agritourism, the idea of petting farms, having these for farm tours, farm stores. We see that quite often around here, that they'll have goats or something like that at the farm store or the orchard, because families love to bring the kids out to see the animals. Finally, farming is a business. You want to keep records. You want to feed the least cost ration that gives you the highest return. Keep records, calculate your cost of production to deter, so you can keep track of whether you're making money or not. And there's the final slide. All yours, Brodman.
Okay, Doug. We had some questions come up in the Q&A. A couple of them I provided some answers to. There were some, I'm going to read those off, Doug, and see if you've got, there's a couple questions for Doug and one for James. So Doug, one question was, after seeding a paddock with Korean Lespedeza, bird's foot, trefoil, orchard grass, common plantain, when do you allow goats in to start eating?
Well, the key thing would be for you to watch the maturity of your plants out there, because you have quite a different variety there. But the idea is you don't want to go in so early that you may threaten the orchard grass or some of our slower germinating legumes, but you certainly want to have the goats in there before the common plantain goes to seed. And certainly before any of those species go to seed. So our idea is to begin to turn the goats in when things begin to get tall. That's when you want to do it. probably about 4 to 5 weeks after after the seeds have started to germinate and come up.
Okay, Doug. And then there was another question, and this was posed when you were
Talking about poison.
talking about that is like, what are the poisons? So
There are a number of poisonous plants, and so this is where we have some weeds that can be poisonous that people need to be aware of, and so the poke can be quite fine. The pokeweed can be quite fine in the early stages, but towards the end, just like Jimson weed, they can be poisonous plants. We have a few of our less common plants that we find along the edge of forests and those areas. And so the best thing is there's great guides. You go on the internet for poisonous plants. Cornell has a great website, but there's also others. And you just basically type in the name of your animal species, and it'll give you a list of the various plants that may be poisonous to that particular species of animal.
And I want to add as well that these animals know how to select what is good for them and bad for them. So that doesn't mean you don't get rid of what is poisonous on the pasture. Do so. And also, do not, well, okay, I'll give a story of what happened here in Kankakee. Somebody cut grass and all the various types of weeds that were there and mixed in with the yew leaves. And his goats started dropping one by one. So don't just give these animals whatever you have on your property. Be careful.
And typically, as James alluded to, we usually only run into a real issue with poisonous plants when are in drought, when we go into drought. Right. When we go into drought and the animals are literally starving, and they'll chew the bark off of trees, but they'll eat almost anything that's green.
Okay. The next question would be for James, and Doug, while James is answering that, can you maybe look at the two questions that I put answers to and see if you want to add anything to those? I think you can see them in the chat box there, or not the chat box, but in the Q&A, the two that were answered. I was trying to field those while you were talking.
That first question, that one I'm going to have to get back to Teacup on.
Okay. And James, this question was posed, is dung clumping a sure sign of internal parasites in sheep?
First of all, it's a good question. And is it a sure sign? I don't think it's always a sure sign of a disease. And I do not know the exact answer to that question. However, we do know that normal droppings by sheep and goats are pet. So when you see clumping, you should start suspecting something. And the picture that I showed there was clumped because there was tapeworm in that clump. So if I saw that in my herd, I would break it open and see whether there's something in there. And then start thinking about what else could be causing the clumping, if that occurs too frequently thereafter. I don't see any tapeworms, that is. And then, that's where the vet consultancy comes in. And that doesn't mean you can't write to us either. I'm going to write to Dr. Jennifer Miller with that question. But yes, I would be concerned. I would want to check why it's clumped as opposed to the normal single pellet units that we see. And I don't know if Doug has something else.
Yep, that's all good.
Yep. Okay, thanks, James. Doug, there was another question thinking about marketing. Is there currently a market for hair sheep hide?
That there is a limited market for hair sheep hide because, of course, the preferred market is one that has a month or two of wool on it, because that's what people like for jackets and coats and things like that. But as far as for hair sheep, there is a limited market, but and that's mostly a direct sales type of market where you're selling that into. So that's there isn't as great a market for hair sheep hides as there certainly is for the wool hide, the wool type of sheep hide. But there
Okay.
is a small market.
Yes, and associated with that answer, Doug, I agree with you. If whoever asked the question writes to me, there's a lady, Northern Illinois, who does wool, adds value to sheep by doing all sorts of things with wool. If you write to me, I'll give you their contact. She buys.
Okay, and we've just had a couple more questions come in. Are there plans for fecal egg count or FAMACHA training?
Oh,
We tried to do FAMACHA training and nobody signed up.
right now, if we get 12 people signing up, it can be done. Yes.
Yes, and we have Teresa Steckler is a trained FAMACHA trainer here in Illinois.
And so is Jennifer Miller, as well as her husband. We are in the Champaign area.
Right. So we can do it. We have people that are willing to do it. We just people say they want the training, and then when we offer it, no one signs up.
Right. And then the fecal egg counts. I do have the one thing that, I do have a microscope and the thing, hematocytometer, whatever you call that. And that can also be used for fecal egg counts, yes. And again, we can train you on that. We only need to have enough people. And the minimum is what, Doug, 12?
12, and yes, and for fecal egg count, because I did hold a fecal egg count for internal parasites for alpaca owners in my area. I got 30 for that.
Okay.
And we have Dr. Nancy Richards is also willing to do that training as well.
Okay, and looks like we had one other question. If you guys know why there is no rabies vaccine specific to goats?
Oh,
Because it's a small market.
yes.
Okay. Well, I think anybody that would be interested in the FAMACHA training could contact Doug or James directly. I believe also in your evaluation survey for this webinar, there is a spot where you could suggest other programs you would like to see. You could maybe in those comments put your name and contact that you would be interested in FAMACHA training. So anyway, you can find a contact either Doug or James about that. I'm sure they would be glad to see those numbers, and if we had enough to meet the minimum capacity, I think they'd be more than happy to host one of those trainings. So
yes, we would. And if you have some ideas for small ruminant training that you'd like to have, put that on the forum as well, because James and I are curious, because we'd offer it as webinars if we could.
Right. And so with the FAMACHA and I don't know, FAMACHA, both FAMACHA and fecal egg counts, I don't know if we can teach that online. I think we can.
No.
It has to be face to face.
That has to be face to face with live animals.
Right.
But other things we can.
We can, yes, other things.
okay. Well, I would like to thank our presenters, Doug and James, for a fabulous presentation. Thanks for sharing your insights with us on raising goats and sheep. And I'd also like to thank everyone else for joining us on this webinar. Hope you got some information that will help you in your small farm endeavors, and hopefully even something you can put in place yet, this season and into the winter. please look for an email from us with a link to the archived webinar on the Illinois Local Foods YouTube channel, as well as a short evaluation of this webinar that we've just mentioned and for the webinar that you just watched. We do look for your feedback and we use it to shape our future webinars, so we do appreciate you taking the time to fill out our evaluation forms. And with that, I want to wish everybody a great day. Hang in there while we're all handling our social distancing in our own manners. And again, thank you for joining us. And this is our last webinar for the 2020 winter webinar series. And if you joined us for multiple webinars, again, thank you for your participation.